So the late great comedian George Carlin used to have a routine on stuff. You know, you got all this stuff in your life, all kinds of stuff. You know, you have a house to put all your stuff in and all the places in your house for your stuff. Sometimes your house isn't big enough, so you got to buy a bigger house just to hold all of your stuff. Sometimes you don't even have enough room in your house. You got to go rent some storage space to hold all of your stuff. By the way, I went and looked up the other day, and it's a $37 billion a year industry for those storage units with an average price of $80 a month that people pay for all the room for their stuff that won't fit in their house for their stuff. George Carlin would go on and talk more about stuff. He'd say, you know, you go to visit somebody else at their house and you just feel uncomfortable because you got to use their stuff. You know, you don't have your stuff handy. Or you go on vacation, and in order to go on vacation, you start looking through all your stuff. What do you got of your stuff that you want to make sure that you take with you so you feel comfortable while you're away, so you got enough stuff with you? God forbid that when you go on vacation, you might take a day trip, and then you got to sort through the stuff that isn't at your home that you took with you on vacation to make sure you got that with you on the day trip, because you got to have your stuff. We got lots and lots of stuff in our lives. And this worship series is kind of dedicated to the idea of reviewing through your stuff and seeing what you might do with it. In preparation for this series, I've been watching and paying attention to some of those TV shows, you know, like about hoarders. Some of that stuff is downright scary. Or there's another one, Clean House, where they, you know, help folks go in and kind of sort through their stuff. And it's really pretty simple when you think about it. There's a 3-step process they usually take to sort through your stuff when it's time for spring cleaning. You look at what you got to keep. What's important? What do you got to hold on to? What do you got to trash? What is junk that you're holding on to that you just need to get rid of? And then what might you give away or recycle? You know, maybe somebody else can make some use of some of your stuff, or maybe it can be recycled and chopped up and built into something new that somebody else can make use of. What do you got to keep? What do you got to trash? And what do you got to give? We're going to spend the next couple of weeks thinking about this. And while we do, I hope that as we think about this, we're not just talking about the stuff in your life, although sometimes there needs some spring cleaning, but in your spiritual lives, in our life with God, in our life of faith. What stuff is important and we got to keep and hold on to it, make a priority? And what stuff is trash? What stuff have we got to get rid of? And what might we give to bless and help somebody else? We're going to dive into that over the next couple of weeks. And before I dive into the first of those, what to keep, I just want to talk for a moment about how sometimes we have these opportunities to wrestle with and think about what we have and what we want to keep, trash, and give. So a spring cleaning, you know, I mean, a lot of us are engaged in that, you know, after the winter, you're kind of going around and, you know, working outside or in stuff in the house. Maybe it's the garage or the basement or your office or other places in your life. Other things that you got to kind of sort through a little bit. While you're doing your spring cleaning, it's an opportunity to think about spiritual spring cleaning. While you're getting rid of some junk, maybe reflect on some things in your life that you want to keep, trash, and give. There are other opportunities that come along in life as well. Maybe not during just spring cleaning time of life. I know that there are some of the members of our church who are moving, and that's a very logical time. I know when my wife and I were preparing to move down to Maryland, that was an opportunity going through all kinds of stuff. And what do we need to sort through? And thinking spiritually as well. What do we need to sort through? What spring cleaning spiritually do we need to do? There are other opportunities as well. Maybe you're not moving. Maybe there's those things where life just slows you down a little bit. I've visited numerous people that had an unexpected illness, and things were moving along real fast and real well, but then all of a sudden things slow down, and they got to stop, reflect a little bit. I've had that conversation with some of you here, and maybe that's an opportunity when life just kind of throws you a little bit of a curveball, health or the health of a family member, to say, let's just kind of reflect a little bit. I know for myself, I had a major surgery about 5 years ago, and I kind of took that recovery time to just do a little bit of introspection. I actually read a book called Halftime, which is about thinking about your halfway time in your career, which I was at and still am pretty much at. And in fact, some of the things that I thought and prayed about actually have led me to St. Paul's at this time in my life and the life of this congregation. It was fruitful spring cleaning time. There are other opportunities as well. Sometimes when you change jobs or careers, that's a chance and an opportunity to think in new directions. I was having a conversation with a guy just today about job change and how that makes you think about your life and where things are. Sometimes that's an opportunity as well. Sometimes there are life situations and stuff. Having a child baptized is a time when you certainly are thinking new thoughts and having conversations. We talked the other day about some of those things in Cassie and Anthony's life. You know, that sometimes that's a place where you're thinking new thoughts and kind of reflecting as well. I know there are folks where there's relationship changes in their life, and that certainly is a time where you reflect and change. A little while back, I was having a conversation with somebody who unfortunately broke up with somebody, and they were kind of using it as an opportunity, though. Okay, where does God want me next? What kind of person am I supposed to be with? They were using that as a spiritual spring cleaning in their life as well. There are these times in life when we need to kind of check in. Do a little bit of evaluating, a little bit of thinking. Last couple of years at St. Paul's has been like that. New pastor after a long-term pastor. It's a chance to think about how we do things and where we're going and who we are as a people. Little spiritual spring cleaning in the life of the congregation. All those kinds of opportunities that God gives us. And the first thing is usually to think, well, what do we keep? What do we hold on to? Now, I mentioned those hoarder shows. I don't know if you've ever watched that, or even YouTube videos of folks just walking through a hoarder's house, and they are downright scary. And part of the problem in those situations is that they hold on to everything. I mean, everything isn't important, everything isn't a priority, but they keep everything. Now, at this point in the message, don't be looking at anybody down the pew from you. But the most extreme example, I knew this young couple that bought a house, and it was from his uncle, I think, and so it didn't get cleaned out between the uncle and him. And they told me the story of how one of the rooms in the house was full of empty paper towel and toilet paper rolls. You know, the cardboard roll? For some odd, strange reason, he had held on to these things. And when I say full, I mean full of these. For like dozens of years, he had been holding on to every empty paper towel and toilet paper roll. Why? You know, he wasn't focusing on the things that were important, on the priorities, on the things worth keeping. So what is worth keeping? Well, you got to decide that for yourself. But let me give you a couple suggestions in your spiritual spring cleaning of things to hold on to. One of those things would surely be love, especially to hold on to God's love. Very natural to think about that as we are coming off of the Easter season. I mean, we celebrated two Sundays ago on Palm and Passion Sunday, Jesus' journey to the cross, and even in a deeper way on Good Friday. And that reminder of Jesus' sacrifice, Jesus' journey to the cross to show us the depth of God's love. And if there were any doubt that Jesus was God's Son on Easter morning when he is raised from the dead, we look back at Good Friday and say this was God's way of undeniably showing to us how much we are loved, how important we are to God. In fact, I just had a conversation with a guy just the other day. I was mentioning that we were getting ready for a baptism, and this guy said, I don't know why you would do that for a child, confuse them so much to start them off in faith. Well, obviously, I said, well, I would have a very different perspective on that. Faith is a foundation for me. The fact that I am loved and cared for by God makes sense of my life. This guy and I are going to continue to have a conversation about this. because God's great love for us is just one of those things worth keeping and holding on to, as well as the love of friends and family. While you're doing your spiritual spring cleaning, give thanks for God's love and the love of others in your life. So some other things that we might hold on to and keep and make sure they're important and vital in our lives. Another of those might be joy. You know the difference between joy and happiness? Sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're unhappy. Joy is the inner feeling of contentment and lightheartedness that sometimes is happy and sometimes not. But it's what makes us just be able to roll through life with a sense of joy, of peace, of a connection with God and with the world around us. So often it comes out in the form of laughter and that ability and that freedom to laugh when you need to. I thought of this a couple good weeks back. If you were here during the worship series we had on stress, one of those times, one of the weeks in that series, we talked about laughter. And if you were here on that morning, we gave out little noisemakers and water pistols and just invited people. And there's a lot of laughter, a lot of fun here in the sanctuary. And a couple weeks after that, a guy caught up with me, and he said how much that morning meant to him. He opened the bag, and inside was a little red water pistol. And he said that reminded him of how his wife, who's passed away a couple of years ago, how they had a little water pistol left over from some family fun, and they would just, the two of them, every once in a while, pull it out and, surprise each other with a little water battle. And he said he opened that bag, and it just made him smile in those celebration and in that remembrance of that joy of that relationship. We need to have joy in our lives. The medical community has actually studied about how important humor and laughter is and how that helps you get through. The author and the professor, Norman Cousins, wrote about how when he had a debilitating arthritis, how he would watch the Marx Brothers and the Three Stooges, and that would help him get through as he would laugh at their antics. We need joy. That's worth holding on to. That's worth keeping as well. And maybe one other thing in the keep pile would, of course, be faith. Just that deep knowledge of a relationship with God, a connection that we can have with God. I've talked to so many people going through hard and challenging times in their lives, and how that sense of faith just helps get through the challenges and the difficulties. And especially a faith that's portable, that matter who you're with, where you are, that faith is always with you. I've run into folks through the years where their faith, it didn't seem so portable. What I mean by that is their faith was kind of locked to a place or a person and didn't really travel too well. The one conversation I remember real well was many years ago in the small town where I first served as a pastor in Ohio. I talked to this guy, and he said that this was his church. Even though he lived in Arizona, he was in town for something and hadn't been there in many, many years. And I said, this isn't your church. Your church ought to be wherever you live in Arizona. Your faith ought to be there. I mean, just because he was baptized and grew up in that congregation, he needed to have a faith that was going to travel wherever he happened to live. I just had a conversation with a lady last week as she was kind of wrestling with a portable faith. Her faith was attached to the previous pastor here at St. Paul's. And she honestly said, I'm still trying to get used to you as the pastor. I've been here 3 years, so, it's time to make that transition. Pastor Neil's retired. You need to kind of make that adjustment, kind of move on. She's working on that. But the worst of that, I experienced in my last congregation, like here at St. Paul's. I followed another longtime pastor. He had been there 40 years, all his ministry. When I first got there, I was looking through some papers, and I came across a letter from a lady who was begging the retired pastor to conduct her wedding. She had been baptized by him. She had been confirmed by him. He'd been part of her life growing up, and she really could only see him doing the wedding. Well, he didn't do the wedding, and I never met that lady because she never came to church anymore. Her faith was kind of attached to that pastor, and she couldn't make the transition. You want a faith that, and it shouldn't be attached to your parents or your grandparents or aunts, uncles, friends, whatever. Wherever you go, whoever you're with, that faith is rock solid in God, no matter what happens in your life. You want to have that faith. Hold on to that. Keep that. But let me end with a scripture passage that I think will just seal what I've been talking about this morning. I want to read it from the Gospel of Luke, one of the 4 accounts of Jesus' life in the 15th chapter. So now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. The outsiders, the people who didn't belong in Jesus' society, they were the ones who were most interested in what Jesus had to say. And the Pharisees and the scribes, they were the religious leaders of Jesus' day, the one who were making others feel like outsiders. They were grumbling and saying, "This fellow, Jesus, welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable, this teaching story. He says, "Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost.' Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance." Boy, in that story, we hear about the love of God. We hear of faith. We hear of joy. We hear of friends and family, of how Jesus reminds us that we all belong and are all found by God. But the truth with that story is very few of us have probably ever searched for a sheep. But then he goes on and he tells another story that we could probably connect with even more deeply. He says, "Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, who of us has not lost something of value, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost.'" We've probably all had that experience of searching for something of great value. Now, I looked up the other day what a silver coin cost, and in that day it was anywhere from 1 to 10 days' wages. So it had some significant value, but 10 silver coins may also refer to a dowry, the gift given when you get married. So it may not have just had monetary value, but it may have had sentimental value in reference to her family and her marriage. For whatever value it had, she had to find it. It was worth keeping. And she kept searching until she found it, and then she celebrated. She rejoiced with friends and family that she had found that which was worth keeping. We need to do the same. And then we also need to get rid of things that are trash, but we will talk about that next weekend. Amen.